The Evermore Grand Hotel lobby was alive with movement. Wealthy guests strolled across the marble floors, their expensive heels clicking against the polished surface. Businessmen murmured into their phones, while uniformed staff glided past with trays of fresh coffee and warm croissants. The air smelled of citrus and mahogany, the signature scent of luxury. Everything was as it should be, until it wasn't. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need you to step aside." The words cut through the hum of morning conversation like a blade. Heads turned. The quiet shuffle of a pianist playing in the corner faltered. A pause settled over the space, expectant, charged. Jasmine Carter had been walking toward the elevators, her posture straight, her tailored black pantsuit sharp and precise. She had spent the morning in meetings, discussing expansion plans, reviewing numbers, ensuring that everything at Evermore Grand ran exactly as it should. Now, she found herself frozen in place, the weight of a dozen stares pressing down on her. She turned slowly. 2 security guards stood beside her, their expressions blank but firm. Behind them, the hotel's head concierge, Richard Davenport, folded his arms across his chest. His name tag gleamed against the crisp white of his uniform. He was a man in his late 40s, lean and sharp-featured, with the air of someone who carried himself just a little too high above others. Jasmine's brows lifted ever so slightly. "Excuse me." Richard straightened. "We have reason to believe you've been stealing from the hotel." The accusation hung heavy in the air. A woman in a silk dress clutched her handbag a little tighter. A man sipping coffee raised an eyebrow, interested. A bellhop hesitated mid-step, eyes darting between Jasmine and Richard. Jasmine inhaled deeply, holding onto the cool edge of her composure. "I beg your pardon." A housekeeper stepped forward, wringing her hands. "I saw her near the penthouse suite this morning." And then a guest reported their diamond bracelet missing. Jasmine narrowed her eyes. She had indeed walked past the penthouse earlier, inspecting details as she always did. But theft? The idea was absurd. Richard snapped his fingers at the guards. "Check her bag." One of the security guards hesitated, glancing at his partner. The other man, taller and broader, stepped forward, unzipped her designer handbag, and reached inside. Silence stretched as he withdrew a gleaming diamond bracelet, its stones catching the chandelier light in dazzling refractions. A murmur swept through the lobby. "There it is," someone whispered. "I knew it." Jasmine's grip tightened on her clutch. She hadn't touched that bracelet. She had never even seen it before. But the moment the jewelry was displayed in the guard's palm, she saw the judgment in the faces around her. Richard exhaled through his nose as if this confirmed what he had long suspected. "Looks like we've caught ourselves a thief." Jasmine tilted her head, eyes locking onto his. The edge of something sharp and dangerous flickered across her expression. "Call the manager," she said, her voice ice-cold. Richard smirked. "I am the manager." The smile that curled across Jasmine's lips was slow, calculated, and far too calm for the circumstances. "Then I guess I'll have to speak to someone above you." Richard let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "There's no one above me." Jasmine met his gaze with an unwavering stare. "Actually, there is." The lobby, once buzzing with hushed murmurs and speculation, fell into a deeper silence. A few staff members exchanged nervous glances. Richard's smirk faltered, just slightly. Jasmine reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. With one swift motion, she pressed a number and held it to her ear. "Mr. Davidson, I need you in the lobby. Now." She snapped the phone shut, eyes still locked on Richard, unflinching, unreadable. And just like that, the balance in the room shifted. A heavy silence settled over the Evermore Grand Hotel lobby. The weight of Jasmine's last words still lingered, pressing into the space like an invisible force. Some guests pretended not to stare, sipping their drinks with exaggerated interest, while others watched openly, drawn to the unfolding spectacle. Richard's smirk had disappeared, replaced with a slight frown. He shifted his weight, glancing at the security guards as if looking for reassurance. Neither of them met his eyes. Jasmine remained still, her expression unreadable, her phone gripped lightly in her manicured fingers. Minutes felt like hours. Then, the sharp click of dress shoes against marble echoed across the floor. Heads turned as an older man in a tailored navy suit strode into the lobby, his expression tense. Mr. Davidson, the hotel's general manager, had arrived. He stopped abruptly when he saw Jasmine standing there, arms crossed, her gaze locked onto Richard. A flicker of unease passed over his face. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, what is going on?" Richard exhaled in visible relief. "Sir, we caught this woman stealing from a guest. She was found with a missing diamond bracelet. I was just handling the situation." Mr. Davidson turned to Jasmine. His voice dropped slightly, respectful but cautious. "Ms. Carter, is this true?" Jasmine's eyes never left Richard. "That depends on what part you're asking about. If you're asking whether I was found with a bracelet I have never seen before, then yes. If you're asking whether I stole it, the answer is no." Richard let out a short laugh as if he still had control of the moment. "Sir, the evidence speaks for itself. We need to call the authorities." Mr. Davidson didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied Jasmine carefully. Then, he turned to Richard with an expression that was unreadable. "Do you know who you're talking to, Richard?" Richard's confidence flickered for the first time. "Of course I do. She's a guest. A guest who was caught red-handed." Mr. Davidson inhaled deeply, then exhaled through his nose. "No, Richard. She's not a guest." Richard frowned. "What do you mean?" Mr. Davidson turned fully toward him. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable weight. "Ms. Carter is the owner of this hotel." The words landed like a thunderclap. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Someone dropped a spoon. A woman near the reception desk clutched her pearls, eyes wide. The guards froze. The housekeeper covered her mouth. And Richard looked like the ground had just disappeared beneath him. What he managed to croak out. His face had gone completely pale. Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "Did I not mention that part earlier?" Richard took a step back. "That's impossible. I've worked here for years. I would have known." Jasmine gave him a cool smile. "I bought Evermore Grand 6 months ago. I chose to keep my ownership private while I conducted an internal audit. And I must say the results have been very revealing." The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. There must be some kind of misunderstanding." Jasmine lifted a brow. "Oh, there is. But not on my part." Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. His voice was carefully measured. "Ms. Carter, what would you like to do about this situation?" Jasmine let her gaze sweep across the lobby, from the stunned staff members to the gawking guests. Then she looked back at Richard. "I think it's time we have a serious conversation about who belongs in this hotel and who doesn't." Richard swallowed hard. And Jasmine Carter had never been more in control. A suffocating silence filled the Evermore Grand Hotel lobby. The weight of Jasmine's revelation hung in the air, pressing down on Richard like an invisible force. His confidence had shattered, his usual air of superiority replaced by something closer to fear. "Miss Carter," he began, voice strained. "This was just a misunderstanding." Jasmine took a step closer, folding her arms. "A misunderstanding? That's what you call publicly humiliating me? Accusing me of theft in front of guests? Ordering security to search my belongings without a shred of evidence?" Richard swallowed his atoms, apple bobbing in his throat. He glanced at Mr. Davidson, desperate for some form of rescue, but the general manager only looked away, jaw-tight, hands clasped behind his back. Jasmine's voice was steady, sharp, each word slicing through the tension. "The only misunderstanding here is yours. You assume that because I look a certain way, because I don't fit the image in your mind of what an owner should be, I didn't belong here." Richard took another step back, as if distance could somehow erase the damage already done. "Miss Carter, please. I have given years to this hotel. I was only trying to do my job." Jasmine let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "If this is how you do your job, then you shouldn't have one." The words hit harder than any slap. The color drained from Richard's face. "Miss Carter, please." She turned to the security guards, who now looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting on their feet. "Escort Mr. Davenport off the premises. Effective immediately, his services are no longer required at Evermore Grand." Richard's mouth opened in shock, but no words came out. He stood frozen, as if his body refused to accept what was happening. The guards hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. "You can't do this," Richard blurted, voice rising. Jasmine's expression remained cold. "I just did." The two guards flanked him gently but firmly, leading him toward the entrance. As they moved through the lobby, the guests and staff, who had once watched him with deference, now looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and silent judgment. A few steps away from the door, Richard twisted around. "This is a mistake. You'll regret this." Jasmine tilted her head, eyes steady, unwavering. "No, Richard. The only mistake was yours." The doors opened and closed behind him. And just like that, he was gone. A slow murmur spread through the crowd as the energy in the room shifted. Some guests looked awkwardly at their phones, others exchanged glances. A few staff members stood rigid, eyes wide, still absorbing what had just unfolded. Jasmine turned to the housekeeper, the one who had accused her earlier. The woman stood trembling, hands clasped tightly together. "And you," Jasmine said, her voice softer but no less firm. "Why did you say you saw me take something?" The woman's lower lip quivered. "I didn't know what to do. Mr. Davenport told me to say it. He said if I didn't, I could lose my job." Jasmine studied her for a long moment. Fear had shaped this woman's decision. Fear of authority. Fear of power wielded unfairly. "That ends today," Jasmine said finally. "If you were afraid of losing your job for telling the truth, then we have a leadership problem. And that will change immediately." The housekeeper's eyes welled with tears. "Thank you, Miss Carter." Jasmine turned toward the rest of the staff, her voice carrying across the room. "Let's be clear. Evermore Grand is built on excellence. But excellence doesn't just mean luxury service and a 5-star experience. It means treating every guest with dignity. It means making decisions based on facts, not assumptions. And it means making sure no one ever feels like they don't belong here." A ripple of agreement moved through the room. Some nodded. Others looked down, ashamed. Jasmine exhaled slowly, allowing the last of her frustration to leave her. As she made her way toward the elevators, a small elderly woman sitting by the fireplace rose to her feet and approached her. She was impeccably dressed, her pearl earrings gleaming under the lobby's soft lighting. I knew you had to be someone important, the woman said, voice warm. You carried yourself with power. Jasmine smiled. No, ma'am. I carried myself like I belong. The woman's smile widened and she gave a small, approving nod. As the elevator doors slid open, Jasmine stepped inside and let them close behind her. Outside in the lobby, the energy of Evermore Grand had already begun to shift. And Jasmine Carter knew this was only the beginning.